The morning Prudence Sullivan turned down the banker's son in front of half the town. Most folks in Genoa, Nevada figured she had finally lost her mind along with her husband. She stood there in her black dress, the same one she had worn for 2 years straight since they buried Thomas, and said loud enough for everyone to hear that she would rather shovel horse manure for the rest of her days than accept another proposal from a man who did not know the first thing about her. The banker's son, Gerald Whitmore, turned red as a sunset and stomped off, leaving Prudence standing alone in the middle of Main Street with her marketing basket and her dignity. It was 1876, and Genoa was not what anyone would call a large town, but it had enough people that news traveled faster than wildfire in summer. By noon, everyone knew that Prudence had refused her 7th suitor since Thomas died. 7 men, ranging from the wealthy mine owner to the young blacksmith, and she had turned them all away with words that ranged from polite refusals to outright declarations that she would never marry again. The women whispered that grief had made her bitter. The men muttered that she was too proud for her own good. But Prudence did not care much what anyone thought anymore. She had loved Thomas with everything in her, married him when she was 19 and he was 22, and they had spent 5 good years building a life together. He had been a rancher, working a small spread just outside town, and she had learned to love the work alongside him. Then one winter morning, his horse had spooked during a storm, thrown him hard, and by the time she found him, the cold had already started to take him. He died in her arms, whispering that he loved her, and something in Prudence had cracked that day like ice on a frozen pond. The ranch had been too much for her to manage alone, so she sold it and moved into a small house in town. She took in sewing and mending, and sometimes she helped at the general store when they needed extra hands. It was not much of a life, but it was hers, and she protected it fiercely. The men who came calling did not seem to understand that she was not looking to be saved or rescued. They saw a young widow, only 26 years old, and they saw an opportunity. They offered her security, comfort, a return to respectability. Not one of them had asked her what she actually wanted. On a Wednesday afternoon in late April, Prudence was sitting on her front porch, mending a shirt for old Mr. Henderson, when she noticed a man standing at her gate. He was tall and lean, wearing dusty trail clothes and a hat pulled low over his eyes. His horse, a sturdy-looking bay, stood patiently behind him. Prudence did not recognize him, which meant he was likely passing through, and she braced herself for whatever he might want. "Madam," he said, his voice quiet and rough like gravel underfoot, "I am looking for work. Heard in town you might know who is hiring." Prudence set down her mending and studied him. He had not removed his hat or stepped onto her property without permission. His hands hung loose at his sides, non-threatening. There was dust on his clothes that spoke of long miles, and his face, what she could see of it, was weathered but not unkind. "The Lucky Star mine is always looking for workers," she said. "And the Morrison Ranch lost some hands last month. They will be hiring on for the summer season." The man nodded slowly. "Thank you, madam. I appreciate it." He started to turn away, then stopped and looked back at her. "If you do not mind my asking, what is it you do?" The question caught her off guard. "I do mending and sewing. Sometimes I work at the general store. You any good at it?" "The sewing? Yes, I am good at it." "That is fine work then." He tipped his hat to her and led his horse away, heading back toward town. Prudence watched him go, puzzled by the brief exchange. He had not introduced himself, had not lingered, had not looked at her the way most men did, like she was a problem in need of solving. He had simply asked a question, thanked her for the answer, and moved on. She did not think much more about it until 3 days later when she was at the general store, helping Mrs. Patterson stock shelves. The same man came in, still wearing his dusty trail clothes, though he had cleaned up some. His face was shaved, and she could see he was younger than she had first thought, probably around 30. He had dark hair and gray eyes that reminded her of storm clouds. "Afternoon," he said to Mrs. Patterson. "I need supplies. I will be working out at the Morrison Ranch." "Peter Morrison hired you on?" Mrs. Patterson asked, her tone friendly but curious. "Yes, madam. Starting tomorrow. Need to stock up before I head out there." Mrs. Patterson began gathering items as he listed them off, and Prudence continued her work, trying not to seem like she was paying attention. But she was aware of him in the space, the quiet way he moved, the economy of his words. "That everything, Mrs. Patterson asked when she had assembled his supplies. "Yes, madam." He paid and gathered his packages, then glanced over at Prudence. He gave her a small nod of recognition, and she nodded back, and then he was gone. "That is Preston Cross," Mrs. Patterson said once the door closed behind him. "Came into town last week. Quiet sort. Peter Morrison says he knows his way around horses and cattle, worked ranches down in California and Arizona. Keeps to himself mostly." Prudence made a non-committal sound and went back to stacking cans of beans, but the name stuck in her mind. Preston Cross. It suited him somehow, that quiet, spare name. Over the next few weeks, Prudence saw Preston Cross a handful of times, always from a distance. He came into town on Saturdays with some of the other ranch hands, but while they headed to the saloon, he usually visited the general store or the feed and tack shop, conducting his business efficiently before riding back out. He did not seem to socialize much, and he did not bother anyone. Then came the day in early May when Prudence was walking back from the post office, carrying a package that had arrived from her sister in Sacramento, and she heard shouting. She turned to see a group of men gathered outside the saloon, their voices raised in anger. Her stomach tightened. She had learned to avoid these situations, but her path home led right past them. As she drew closer, she could see that Gerald Whitmore, the banker's son she had refused so publicly, was in the center of the group, his face flushed with drink and anger. He was yelling at someone, and when the crowd shifted, she saw it was Preston Cross. "You think you are better than us," Gerald was shouting. "Coming in here with your quiet act, looking down on everyone." Preston stood still, his expression neutral. "I am not looking down on anyone. I just came for supplies." "You are a liar." Gerald lunged forward, but one of his friends caught him. "You are all the same, you drifters. Think you can come into our town and take what is ours." Prudence did not know what possessed her, but she found herself walking straight into the group. "That is enough, Gerald," she said firmly. "You are drunk and making a fool of yourself." The men turned to look at her, surprise on their faces. Gerald's expression shifted from anger to something uglier. "Well, if it is not the high and mighty widow," he sneered. "Come to defend your new beau." "That was quick. Guess you were not as devoted to your dead husband as you claimed." The words hit her like a slap, but Prudence kept her composure. "Go home, Gerald. Sleep it off." "You do not give me orders," Gerald said, stepping toward her. "You are nothing but a—" Preston moved faster than Prudence would have thought possible. One moment he was standing several feet away. The next he was between her and Gerald, his hand on Gerald's chest, stopping him cold. "That is enough," Preston said, his voice still quiet but carrying a weight that made everyone go still. "The lady asked you to leave. You should listen." Gerald stared at Preston, and for a moment Prudence thought he might actually throw a punch. But something in Preston's steady gaze must have gotten through, because Gerald stumbled back, spat on the ground, and turned away, his friends following. The crowd dispersed quickly after that, leaving Prudence and Preston standing alone on the wooden sidewalk. She realized her hands were shaking and she clutched the package tighter to stop the trembling. "Thank you," she said. "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did," Preston said simply. He studied her for a moment, his gray eyes concerned. "Are you all right?" "I am fine." She took a breath. "Gerald has been angry since I refused his proposal. He will get over it eventually. He should not have spoken to you that way." Preston glanced in the direction Gerald had gone. A man who cannot handle rejection with grace is not much of a man. Something about the way he said it, matter of fact and without any expectation of praise, made Prudence look at him more closely. "You barely know me. Why did you step in?" "Because it was the right thing to do." He paused. "And because no one deserves to be treated like that." They stood there for a moment, the afternoon sun warm on their faces, and Prudence felt something shift inside her, some small crack in the wall she had built around herself since Thomas died. "I should get home," she said finally. "I will walk with you if that is all right. Just to make sure there is no more trouble." Prudence wanted to refuse, to insist she did not need protection, but the truth was she felt shaken, and the idea of walking home alone did not appeal. "All right." They walked in silence at first, Preston leading his horse. The streets of Genoa were quiet in the afternoon heat, most people seeking shade or taking a rest before evening chores. Prudence was acutely aware of Preston beside her, his presence solid and calm. "How long have you been widowed?" Preston asked, his tone careful, not prying, just curious. 2 years. My husband Thomas died in a riding accident. I am sorry for your loss." "Thank you," she glanced at him. "Have you ever been married?" "No, madam, came close once, but it did not work out." "Why not?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. "She wanted me to be someone I was not. And I realized I would rather be alone than pretend to be a different person." Prudence understood that more than she cared to admit. "That is why I have refused every man who has come calling since Thomas died. They do not want to know who I am. They just want a wife, any wife, to fill a role." "That does not seem like much of a reason to marry someone." "No, it does not." She stopped at her gate, turning to face him. "Thank you again for earlier and for walking me home." "You are welcome." He hesitated, then said, "If you do not mind my asking, what do you want?" "You said those men do not ask, so I am asking." The question caught her completely off guard. She stared at him, trying to find words for something she had barely admitted to herself. "I want to be seen. I want someone to know who I am, not who they want me to be. I want to do work that matters to me. I want to make my own choices." She stopped, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "That probably sounds foolish." "No," Preston said, his gray eyes serious. "It sounds honest." He tipped his hat to her and led his horse away. And Prudence stood at her gate, watching him go, feeling like something important had just happened, though she could not quite name what it was. Over the following weeks, Prudence found herself thinking about Preston Cross more than she wanted to admit. She would be sewing and remember the way he had stepped between her and Gerald without hesitation. She would be measuring out flour at the general store and recall his question, "What do you want?" No one had asked her that in so long. She told herself it meant nothing, that he was just a kind man who had done a decent thing. But then she would see him in town, and he would nod to her, and sometimes they would exchange a few words, and each time she felt that same shift inside her, like ice breaking up in a spring river. One Saturday in late May, Prudence was at the general store when Preston came in for his usual supplies. Mrs. Patterson was in the back, so Prudence was minding the counter. "Afternoon," Preston said, setting his hat on the counter. "I need a few things." "Of course." Prudence pulled out her ledger. "What do you need?" He listed off items, and she gathered them efficiently. As she worked, she was aware of him watching her, not in the uncomfortable way some men did, but with genuine interest. "You are good at this," he said. "Quick and organized." "I have been doing it long enough." She wrapped his purchases. "Mrs. Patterson says you are doing good work out at the Morrison Ranch. Peter Morrison is a fair boss. The work is honest. You plan to stay in the area." The question came out before she could stop it, and she felt her cheeks warm. Preston did not seem bothered by it, though. He considered for a moment, then said, "I have been drifting for a long time. It might be nice to stay somewhere for a while. Genoa is a good town, mostly." She handed him his packages. "Despite what you saw with Gerald, every place has its difficult people." He paid and picked up his supplies, then paused. "Would it be all right if I called on you sometime, just to talk? No expectations or proposals or anything like that, just conversation." Prudence's first instinct was to refuse, to protect the careful solitude she had built. But something in his expression, the genuine interest and respect in it, made her hesitate. "Why would you want to do that?" she asked. "Because I find you interesting. Because you speak your mind. Because you are not like most people I have met." He shifted his weight slightly. "But if you would rather I did not, I understand." She thought about it, really thought about it. Then she said, "You can call on me tomorrow afternoon if you like. I will make coffee." The smile that crossed Preston's face was small but genuine, lighting up his usually serious expression. "I would like that, thank you." After he left, Prudence stood behind the counter, her heart beating faster than it had in years. "Mrs. Patterson emerged from the back room, a knowing look on her face. "That Preston Cross is a good man," she said. "Quiet but solid, not like some of these loud talkers we have around here." "He is just coming for coffee," Prudence said, more defensively than she intended. "Of course, dear, Mrs. Patterson smiled. "Just coffee." That night, Prudence found herself cleaning her already clean house, moving furniture slightly, picking wildflowers from her small garden to put in a vase. She told herself she was just being hospitable, that it did not mean anything special. But when she caught herself standing in front of her wardrobe, debating what dress to wear, she had to admit she was nervous in a way she had not been since she was courting Thomas. The next afternoon, Preston arrived exactly when he said he would, cleaned up and wearing what were clearly his best clothes, though they were still plain and practical. He had brought her a small bag of peppermints from the general store. "I did not know if you liked sweets," he said, handing them to her at the door. "But Mrs. Patterson said most folks do." "Thank you." Prudence led him inside, gesturing to the small sitting area. "Please have a seat. The coffee is almost ready." She busied herself in the kitchen, giving herself a moment to collect her thoughts. When she returned with 2 cups of coffee, Preston was sitting on the sofa, looking at the room with interest but not judgment. "You have a nice place," he said, accepting the coffee. "Comfortable." "It is small, but it is mine." She sat in the chair across from him. "After I sold the ranch, I needed something that felt manageable. That makes sense." He sipped his coffee. "Do you miss ranch life?" The question surprised her with its directness. Most people avoided talking about her life with Thomas, as if mentioning it would cause her pain. But Preston's tone was simply curious, interested. "Yes and no," she said honestly. "I loved working with Thomas, building something together. But after he died, all I could see was his absence in everything. The barn where his horse should have been. The fields he should have been working. It was too much. Grief has a way of changing how we see places. It does." She studied him over her coffee cup. "You said you have been drifting. What are you running from?" He did not seem offended by the question. Instead, he set down his cup and leaned back, considering. "I am not sure I am running from anything anymore. Maybe I was at first. I grew up in Missouri on a small farm. My father died when I was 15 and my mother remarried a year later. Her new husband did not much care for me, made that clear. So when I turned 18, I left. Worked ranches all over, never stayed anywhere long. After a while, it became a habit. Easier to move on than to put down roots. What changed? I got tired, I suppose. Tired of always being on the outside looking in. Tired of not having a place that felt like mine. He met her eyes. When I got to Genoa, something felt different, like maybe I could stop here. Before or after you met me? The question was bold, and Prudence felt her cheeks warm as soon as she said it. Preston's expression softened. After. Definitely after. They sat in silence for a moment, the admission hanging in the air between them. Prudence felt her heart beating faster, and she tried to sort through the tangle of emotions inside her. Fear, because opening herself up to someone meant risking the kind of pain she had felt when Thomas died. Hope, because Preston looked at her like she was a person, not a problem or a prize. Curiosity, because she genuinely wanted to know more about this quiet cowboy who had appeared in her life. "Tell me about working ranches," she said, changing the subject to something safer. "What is it like, moving from place to place?" Preston seemed to understand she needed the conversation to shift, and he obliged, telling her about the different ranches he had worked, the people he had met, the landscapes he had seen. He spoke well, painting pictures with his words, and Prudence found herself relaxing, enjoying the conversation. When he described a ranch in Arizona where he had helped break horses, she found herself leaning forward, interested. "I always loved watching Thomas work with horses. There is something about it, the trust that has to be built. It takes patience," Preston agreed, "and respect. You cannot force a horse to trust you, you have to earn it. That is true of people too, I think." "It is." They talked through the afternoon, the conversation flowing easily from one topic to another. Preston asked her about her sewing, seemed genuinely interested in the work she did. She asked him about his travels, and he shared stories that were sometimes funny, sometimes sad, always honest. When the light began to fade and Preston said he should be getting back to the ranch, Prudence was surprised at how quickly the time had passed. "Thank you for the coffee," he said at the door. "And the conversation. Thank you for coming." She hesitated, then said, "You are welcome to call again if you would like." "I would like that very much." After he left, Prudence sat on her porch in the gathering dusk, feeling lighter than she had in months. Maybe years. She had enjoyed herself, simply enjoyed spending time with someone. It felt like the first real breath after being underwater for too long. Over the next several weeks, Preston began calling on Prudence regularly. Sometimes it was just for coffee and conversation on her porch. Sometimes they would walk through town together, and she would show him the places that were important to her. The creek where she and Thomas used to picnic. The hill overlooking the valley where she went when she needed to think. Preston listened when she talked about Thomas, never seeming jealous or uncomfortable with her memories. "He was part of your life," he said once. "Part of who you are. I would not want you to forget that." In turn, Prudence learned more about Preston. He told her about his childhood, growing up with a father who taught him the value of hard work, but also kindness. About his mother, who he still wrote to occasionally, though her husband made communication difficult. About the years of wandering, sometimes lonely, sometimes free, always searching for something he could not quite name. "I think I was looking for a place where I belonged," he said. "Or maybe a person." They were sitting on her porch on a warm June evening, watching fireflies drift through her small garden. Prudence felt her breath catch at his words. "Have you found that?" she asked softly. Preston turned to look at her, his gray eyes serious. "I think maybe I have." The air between them felt charged, full of possibility. Prudence knew this was a moment where things could change, where she could step back into safety or step forward into something unknown. Her heart pounded as she made her choice. "Preston," she said, "I need you to know something. I cared for Thomas deeply. I will always love his memory. But these past weeks with you, I have felt something I did not think I would feel again. I like who I am when I am with you. I like how you see me." "How do I see you?" "Like I am a whole person, with thoughts and dreams and desires. Not just a widow, not just someone who needs taking care of. You ask me what I want, what I think. You listen when I answer. Do you know how rare that is?" Preston reached over and took her hand gently, his calloused palm warm against hers. "You deserve to be seen for who you are, Prudence. Any man who does not understand that is a fool." She looked down at their joined hands, feeling tears prick her eyes. "I am scared," she admitted. "When Thomas died, it nearly destroyed me. I do not know if I could survive that kind of loss again." "I am scared too," Preston said quietly. "I have spent so long protecting myself by not letting anyone get close. But then I met you, and I realized that being alone is its own kind of death, a slow one." He squeezed her hand gently. "I cannot promise nothing bad will ever happen. Life does not work that way. But I can promise that I will do my best to build something good with you for as long as we have." Prudence turned to face him fully, seeing the honesty in his expression, the vulnerability. This was not a man trying to rescue her or claim her. This was a man offering to walk beside her to build something together. "I would like that," she said. "I would like to try." Preston smiled, and it transformed his whole face, making him look younger, happier. "So would I." They sat on the porch until late that night, holding hands, talking about everything and nothing, making plans and sharing dreams. When Preston finally left, he kissed her hand gently at the gate, a gesture that was both old-fashioned and sweet. "Good night, Prudence." "Good night, Preston." She watched him ride away into the darkness, then went inside and sat at her kitchen table, her hand pressed to her heart. She was falling in love again, and it was terrifying and wonderful and real. The next morning, the whole town seemed to know that Preston Cross was courting Prudence Sullivan. Mrs. Patterson smiled knowingly when Prudence came into the general store. Several of the older women nodded approvingly. And of course, there were the disapproving looks and whispered comments from some who thought she was being disloyal to Thomas's memory, or that Preston was not good enough for her. Prudence found she did not much care. For the first time since Thomas died, she was thinking about the future with something other than dread or resignation. She was thinking about it with hope. Preston continued to work at the Morrison Ranch, but he spent his free time with Prudence. They fell into a comfortable pattern, seeing each other several times a week, learning each other's habits and preferences. Prudence discovered that Preston was an early riser who loved watching the sunrise. Preston learned that Prudence had a talent for gardening and could coax flowers and vegetables from even difficult soil. One Sunday in early July, Preston asked if she would like to ride out to the Morrison Ranch to see where he worked. Peter Morrison had invited them both to Sunday dinner, and Prudence accepted, curious to see this part of Preston's life. The Morrison Ranch was a solid operation, with good buildings and well-maintained fences. Peter Morrison was a weathered man in his 50s with a kind smile and a firm handshake. His wife, Clara, was a warm woman who welcomed Prudence like an old friend. "Preston has spoken of you often," Clara said as she showed Prudence into their comfortable ranch house. "It is good to see him settling down. He is a fine worker, but more than that, he is a good man." During dinner, Prudence watched Preston interact with the Morrison family and the other ranch hands who joined them. He was quiet but engaged, contributing to conversations without dominating them. He spoke respectfully to Peter Morrison and helped Clara clear dishes without being asked. The other hands clearly liked him, joking with him in the easy way of men who work together well. After dinner, Preston showed her around the ranch. They walked through the barn, where horses nickered softly in their stalls, and out to a corral where several young horses were being trained. "That is my project," Preston said, gesturing to a beautiful paint horse that watched them with intelligent eyes. "She was half wild when she came here, but she is coming around. She is beautiful. She is smart, too. Reminds me of you." Prudence laughed. "Are you saying I am half wild? I am saying you are smart and beautiful, and you have learned to be cautious about who you trust. But when you do trust someone, you give them your whole heart." Preston turned to face her, leaning against the corral fence. "Am I wrong?" "No," Prudence said softly. "You are not wrong." Preston reached out and brushed a strand of hair back from her face, his touch gentle. "I am falling in love with you, Prudence. I want you to know that." Her breath caught. They had not spoken of love yet, though she had felt it growing between them. Hearing him say it made it real, undeniable. "I am falling in love with you too," she said. "It frightens me, but I am." "We will take it slow," Preston said. "We will take all the time you need." But even as he said it, Prudence knew that slow would not change the fundamental truth. She loved Preston Cross. She loved his quiet strength, his genuine interest in her thoughts and feelings, the way he made her feel alive again. She loved the man he was, not some idealized version, but the real person with his own fears and scars and hopes. As summer deepened, their relationship deepened with it. Preston proposed in August, not with grand gestures or public declarations, but quietly on her porch on an evening when the air smelled of jasmine and the sky was full of stars. "Marry me," he said, holding both her hands in his. "Not because you need to be married, or because I need a wife to cook and clean. Marry me because we are better together than apart. Because I love you and you love me, and we both want to build a life together. Marry me because you want to, not because you should." Prudence looked at him, this good man who had come into her life and changed everything simply by asking her what she wanted. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married in September, a simple ceremony in the small church in Genoa. Prudence wore a dress she made herself, deep blue instead of white or black. Preston wore his best suit, which they had bought together at the general store. Peter and Clara Morrison stood up with them, and most of the town came to witness. As they exchanged vows, Prudence felt Thomas's memory as a gentle presence, not a ghost that haunted her, but a part of her past that had led her to this moment. She would always love him, but she loved Preston too, differently but no less truly. The wedding breakfast at the hotel was simple but joyful. Mrs. Patterson cried happy tears. Even Gerald Whitmore, who had been avoiding Prudence for months, came by to offer stiff but genuine congratulations, which she accepted graciously. Preston had bought a small piece of land just outside town, and they spent the fall building their home together. It was not a large house, but it was solid and well built, with a good barn and a corral. Preston continued to work at the Morrison Ranch, but he also began breaking horses on his own land, building a reputation as someone who could work with difficult animals. Prudence continued her sewing business, but she also discovered a joy in helping Preston with the horses. She had always loved them, and Preston was patient in teaching her his methods. They worked well together, anticipating each other's needs, communicating with looks and small gestures the way people do when they are deeply connected. Their first winter together was cold but happy. They spent long evenings by the fire, talking and planning and simply being together. Preston taught Prudence to play checkers. She taught him to make bread from scratch. They learned the rhythms of each other's days and moods, the small accommodations and adjustments that make a marriage work. One night in January, as they lay in bed with snow falling softly outside their window, Preston said, "Are you happy?" "Yes," Prudence said without hesitation. "Are you?" "More than I ever thought I could be." He pulled her closer. "Thank you for giving me a chance, for giving us a chance. Thank you for asking me what I wanted, for seeing me." "Always," he promised. "I will always see you." Spring came, and with it new beginnings. Prudence discovered she was pregnant in March, and the joy and terror of that realization hit her in equal measure. She was excited but also frightened, remembering how quickly life could change, how fragile happiness could be. Preston held her as she cried, understanding without needing to be told all the complicated emotions she was feeling. "We will face this together," he said. "Whatever comes, we will face it together." The pregnancy was healthy and Prudence bloomed with it. She continued to work, though Preston insisted she not overdo it. He was protective without being controlling, concerned without being overbearing. He asked her how she felt, what she needed, what she wanted. In November, their son was born, a healthy boy with his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair. They named him Thomas Preston Cross, honoring both the past and the present. Preston cried when he held his son for the first time, overwhelmed with love and responsibility and hope. Prudence watched her husband cradle their child and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. This was her family. This was the life she had chosen, the life she had built with a quiet cowboy who had asked her what she wanted instead of telling her what she needed. The years that followed were full and good. They had their struggles, as all families do. There were lean times when money was tight, and they had to be careful. There were moments of disagreement and tension, times when they had to work through difficulties with patience and communication. But through it all, they maintained the foundation they had built, that core of respect and genuine love that had brought them together. When Thomas was 3, they had a daughter, Margaret Ruth, who inherited her mother's stubbornness and her father's quiet determination. 2 years later, another son, Samuel James, who was gentle and thoughtful. Preston's horse training business grew steadily. He developed a reputation throughout Nevada and into California as someone who could work with even the most difficult horses. He never used harsh methods, only patience and understanding, and people came from far away to learn from him. Prudence expanded her sewing to include teaching, giving lessons to young women who wanted to learn the craft. She also began breeding and training horses alongside Preston, discovering she had a real talent for it. Together, they built something solid and lasting, a ranch that was successful but never at the expense of their family. The town of Genoa grew and changed around them. The silver boom brought new people and new businesses. The railroad came through, connecting them more directly to the wider world. But Preston and Prudence remained constant, their relationship a source of stability in changing times. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they sat on the porch of their house, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was nearly 11 now, tall for his age and already showing an interest in horses like his father. Margaret was 7, fierce and funny, always getting into something. Samuel was 5, quieter than his siblings but with a deep well of feeling that reminded Prudence of herself. "You remember the first time we met?" Preston asked, taking her hand. "You were standing at my gate asking about work. You looked so dusty and tired." "I was. I had been riding for days, thinking about moving on to California. Then I saw you on your porch and something made me stop." He squeezed her hand. "Best decision I ever made. The second time I saw you, you were defending me from Gerald Whitmore. He was an idiot. He was. But you were kind even then. You asked me what I wanted." "And what did you want?" Preston asked, even though he knew the answer. "This," Prudence said, gesturing to their home, their children, their life together. "I wanted to be seen and known and loved for who I truly am. I wanted to build something with someone who respected me as a partner. I wanted a family and a home that felt like mine. You gave me all of that." "We gave it to each other," Preston corrected gently. "I wanted a place to belong, a person to belong with. You gave me that, Prudence. You gave me a home." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the Sierra Nevada mountains in the distance. The air was warm and smelled of sage and pine. Inside the house, the lamplight glowed golden and welcoming. "Tell me again about the widow who refused every suitor," their daughter Margaret demanded, running up to the porch. She loved this story, never tired of hearing it. Prudence smiled and pulled her daughter onto her lap. "Well, there was once a widow who lived in this very town, and she refused every man who asked to marry her. Because they did not ask her what she wanted," Margaret filled in, knowing the story by heart. "That is right. Until one day a quiet cowboy came to town. Papa," Samuel called, running over as well. "Yes, Papa," Prudence confirmed, exchanging a warm look with Preston. "And do you know what made him different?" He asked what she wanted, Thomas said, joining them with the wisdom of his nearly 11 years. "He did," Preston confirmed, gathering Samuel into his lap. "And do you know what she said?" "That she wanted to be seen," Margaret said, "and loved for who she was." "That is right," Prudence said. "And they fell in love and got married and had 3 wonderful, if sometimes troublesome, children." "We are not troublesome," Margaret protested, though she was grinning. "Of course not," Preston said, completely serious. "You are perfect." The children laughed, and Prudence leaned against her husband's shoulder, feeling the weight of his arm around her, solid and sure. This was what happiness looked like, she thought. Not perfect, not without challenges, but real and deep and lasting. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, the family went inside together, the children chattering about their day, Preston banking the fire, Prudence lighting lamps and starting preparations for supper. It was ordinary and extraordinary all at once, this life they had built. That night, after the children were asleep, Preston and Prudence stood together at the window of their bedroom, looking out at the land they had built their life on. "No regrets?" Preston asked softly. "Not a single one," Prudence said. "You? Only that I did not find you sooner." "We found each other at exactly the right time," Prudence said with certainty. "Any earlier and we might not have been ready." "That is true." Preston kissed her temple gently. "I love you, Prudence Cross. I love you too, Preston Cross." They stood there in the quiet, 2 people who had found each other against the odds, who had built something lasting through patience and respect and genuine love. In a time and place where women were often expected to accept whatever life handed them, Prudence had insisted on being asked what she wanted. And in Preston, she had found a man who not only asked but listened, who not only loved her but saw her, who not only married her but chose to build a life alongside her as true partners. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. There were droughts that tested them, illnesses that frightened them, financial worries that kept them up at night. But they faced everything together, never losing sight of the partnership that was the foundation of their relationship. Their children grew strong and capable. Thomas eventually took over much of the horse training, developing his own innovations while honoring his father's methods. Margaret, true to her fierce nature, became a skilled rancher, unafraid of hard work and able to hold her own in a man's world. Samuel discovered a love of learning and eventually became a teacher, though he never lost his connection to the ranch and his family. Preston's mother came to visit when Thomas was 12, having finally left her difficult husband. She stayed for 3 months, and Prudence watched Preston's face light up at having his mother in his home, being able to show her the life he had built. The older woman had tears in her eyes as she said goodbye. "You found what you needed," she told her son. "A good woman and a good life. I am so proud of you." Genoa continued to grow, becoming more connected to the wider world, but the Crosses remained rooted in their community. They helped neighbors when times were hard, celebrated with them when times were good, and built friendships that lasted decades. As they aged, their love deepened and matured. The passion of those early days mellowed into something even stronger, a partnership so deep that sometimes they could communicate without words. They knew each other's moods and thoughts, finished each other's sentences, worked together with the kind of synchronicity that only comes from years of practice. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party. The ranch was full of friends and neighbors, food and laughter and music. Preston and Prudence danced together as the sun set, swaying slowly to the fiddle music, surrounded by everyone they loved. 25 years, Prudence marveled. Where did the time go? "Into building this," Preston said, gesturing around them. "Into loving you, into raising our family. I would not change a single day of it. Not even the hard ones. Especially not the hard ones. They taught us how strong we are together." As they danced, Prudence thought about the woman she had been, that grieving widow who had refused every suitor, who had been so certain she would never love again. She thought about how close she had come to shutting herself off from life, from joy, from the possibility of new love. And she thought about Preston, the quiet cowboy who had asked her what she wanted, who had seen her as a person rather than a problem to be solved, who had loved her enough to let her keep her independence even as they built a life together, who had shown her that loving again did not mean forgetting Thomas, that the heart has infinite capacity for love. "Thank you," she said to Preston as they danced. "For what? For asking, for listening, for loving me, for all of it." Preston pulled her closer. "Thank you for answering, for trusting me, for building this life with me, for all of it." They continued to dance as the stars came out, surrounded by the evidence of their love, the family and community they had built together, the life they had chosen. The years rolled on, bringing them into their 60s. Preston's hair turned silver, and Prudence's face gained lines that told the story of a life well lived. They slowed down some, letting their children take on more of the work, but they never stopped working together, never stopped finding joy in each other's company. They became grandparents, then great-grandparents, their family tree spreading and growing. And through it all, they remained connected by that initial bond, that moment when Preston had asked Prudence what she wanted and had actually listened to the answer. On a spring morning when Prudence was 68 and Preston was 72, they sat together on their porch, watching the sunrise as they had done countless times before. The ranch spread out before them, prosperous and beautiful, testament to decades of hard work and love. "Do you remember," Preston said, his voice still strong despite his years, "when I first asked you what you wanted?" "Of course," Prudence said, her hand finding his automatically. "I said I wanted to be seen, to be known, to make my own choices. Did you get what you wanted?" Prudence turned to look at her husband, this man who had shared her life for so many years, who had been her partner in every sense of the word. She thought about the life they had built, the choices she had made, the person she had been allowed to become. "Yes," she said. "And so much more than I ever imagined." Preston smiled, the same smile that had first caught her attention so many years ago when he was a dusty cowboy and she was a grieving widow. "Good," he said. "That is all I ever wanted." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb higher, beginning a new day. Their children and grandchildren would visit later, bringing noise and laughter and life. But for now, it was just the two of them, Preston and Prudence, the quiet cowboy and the widow who had refused to settle, who had insisted on being asked what she wanted. And in the asking and the answering, they had found not just love, but partnership. Not just marriage, but true companionship. Not just a life together, but a life they had chosen, deliberately and joyfully, every single day. The ranch would continue after them, passed down through generations. The story of how they met would be told to children and grandchildren. A reminder that the right questions matter, that seeing someone truly is a form of love, that the best relationships are built on respect and genuine partnership. But for now, they simply sat together, two people who had found each other and built something lasting, watching another sunrise over the land they loved, content in the knowledge that they had lived well and loved deeply. "Ready for another day?" Preston asked, squeezing her hand. "With you?" Prudence smiled. "Always." They rose together as they had done for decades and walked into their home hand in hand, ready to face whatever the day would bring. Because that was what they had always done, from that first moment when Preston had asked Prudence what she wanted. They had faced life together, as partners, as lovers, as friends. And in the end, that was everything either of them had ever truly wanted. To be seen, to be known, to be loved. To choose and be chosen. To build a life together that honored both their individual selves and their partnership. To love deeply and well. Not just once, but every day, in small moments and large ones, in hard times and good. The story of Prudence and Preston Cross became part of Genoa's history, told and retold as an example of what love could be when built on mutual respect and genuine partnership. The widow who refused every suitor until a quiet cowboy asked what she wanted instead. And in that asking, in that listening, in that true seeing, they had both found exactly what they needed. Their love story was not perfect, but it was real. It was not without challenges, but they met them together. It was not what either of them had planned, but it was better than anything they could have imagined. And as the years passed and their story became legend, the core truth remained simple and profound. The best love stories are not about rescuing or being rescued. They are about two people who see each other truly, who choose each other daily, who build a life together based on respect, trust, and genuine affection. They are about asking the right questions and being brave enough to answer honestly. They are about partnership. That is the story of Prudence and Preston Cross. That is the story of the widow who refused every suitor until a quiet cowboy asked what she wanted instead. And in the asking and the answering, they found everything.